Hi, folks. Welcome back. We are joined again with Jeff Berkowitz in Chicago, and Jeff and I will be talking about some of the major issues that have recently happened and some things that will likely be to happen. But Jeff, before we begin, just Merry Christmas to all of those who are watching us on YouTube, and if you're watching us on cable, you're probably seeing this after Christmas, so we hope you had a good one.
And a happy belated Hanukkah to our Jewish friends out there
as well. And folks, I want to start off. Jeff and I will be talking about some political events, and to Jeff's credit, I wanted to bring up something that we were talking about back in October on our show, and that's a reason why, folks, you want to be watching us, because we do reporting here and are in contact behind the scenes with people. Jeff, let's just take a quick look at what you were telling our audience last October 7th. Got some breaking news on that. What is it that you can tell us?
The breaking news, Terry, is as of October 7th, when we're taping, a likely candidate, I'll put it that way, a likely candidate for governor in the GOP primary would be Aurora Mayor Richard Irvin. So Mayor Irvin is there. He's not confirmed that he's thinking or will be a candidate, but the local media have jumped on this. WGN, NBC, local in Chicago, in saying that this candidate is now thinking about running for governor, or is going to run for governor, and he will be doing it, they have said, with the support of Ken Griffin, who has denied he's made a decision on a candidate yet. So that's what people have been hearing. It's somewhat confused, perhaps, array of thoughts in the last week, but it's clear that Richard Irvin is in the mix. Important stuff, which is what we focused on. There were 4 candidates as of the time we were talking about this in October: Jussie Sullivan, Darren Bailey, Gary Rabon, Paul Schimpf. And I said that Richard Irvin is thinking about this now. He has been asked to think about it. There are people who are high up who have been talking to him about it. Most people would say that's representatives.
Jeff, what do we know about his politics? So he's going to run, if he runs, he's going to run as a Republican. But is he a John McCain Republican, or is he a Donald Trump Republican?
Well, we don't really know, and I wouldn't say I know. I have not been able to sit down with him. I've tried to contact him. He's not gotten back to me. And as a mayor, you know, you're not constantly taking positions on the key statewide issues. So, like pensions, what would he do about that? Well, he said something and has views on crime, because that's been an issue in Aurora. So, and it's been a major issue nationally and state and local currently. Inflation is becoming a major city, state, and national issue as well, and he may have some views on that. But the short thing is, it's not as well known, certainly, that his positions as mayor of Aurora do not directly correspond to the things he'll have to talk about if he is going to run for governor. That's
so I think, let's see, he would be, I think, the 6th candidate, including Max Solomon.
Well, yeah, you're right. If you count Max Solomon, often people don't, because he doesn't seem to have a significant campaign going. But if you do include Max, that would be fine.
And you know, when you get 6 people or more into a primary, then you can win the primary with a relatively small amount of the vote. Now, that said, if we are going to get a lot more money pumped into the Republican campaign, with this promise of $300 million coming in, are we going to be expecting more Republicans now to run, people that might have some support, but perhaps we're sitting on the fence because, you know, it's a daunting challenge to try to raise millions of dollars for a statewide campaign. But if we're going to get this from the chairman of Citadel, Ken Griffin, then, you know, maybe we're going to get some other Republicans jumping into the race. Have you heard anything about that?
No, I mean, Rodney Davis, who is thought to be a candidate who would get in if his congressional district was taken away, basically the Democrats said, here, we give you the 15th, there'll be no opposition. And so he's running for that seat. He has said he's running like there's a strong competition, the usual thing candidates say in that position, but it's clear he's not thinking of running for governor, so he's out. And people floated the name of Kirk Dillard. Maybe Kirk Dillard floated the name of Kirk, but I don't think people think that's going to happen. So, and with Griffin being a player, almost surely he has not said what it'll take and how he'll do it, but he will be a player with that kind of money floating in. I don't see anybody without substantial, wealth getting in there now and saying they're going to, make a race of this. So I think this is the field. I think, and and I mean, oh, I shouldn't say that. Look, Adam Kinzinger's name was floated, and he has said he's not running for Congress again, and he may run for governor, he may run for Senate. He's been interviewed, as we discussed a few weeks ago, by Cranes, and he didn't say and hasn't said yet. I think he's more of a Senate candidate, if anything, than a governor candidate, but he's a possibility. He's got certainly enough name recognition, but as he could get into the race, but as people point out, he's going to have a lot of trouble getting out of the primary. He may be a reasonable general election candidate, just as Mark Kirk was a good statewide candidate, because now Kinzinger, who's fairly conservative and voted with Trump maybe 70% of the time, he's become sort of, a black sheep. What's the word we say these days?
Well, because he voted for impeachment of Trump, so he
Right.
turned off a lot of the Republican base who viewed that vote as being a turncoat by.
And there are a lot of people who were in the Republican Party who would say the same thing. So his run in the governor's race would be problematic.
I would argue that right now. I just interviewed Darren Bailey the other day because he just was on a bus tour with his newly elected, or newly selected, I should say, Lieutenant Governor running mate, Stephanie Trussell. I will opine that I don't think anyone in the Republican field thus far is working harder than Darren Bailey, who is out there really every day, almost holding some event somewhere. He is constantly moving around the state. And Jeff, you had interviewed also Stephanie Trussell earlier again this year. I don't remember exactly when that was. I don't have a date on this.
It was actually 2 years ago. It was 2019.
Was it that long ago? Oh my God!
Yeah. Do you have that clip? I thought you had the clip.
We have it ready. Let's take a listen. What she had to say,
2 years ago.
So we'll know a little bit more about you. We're talking a little bit at this one point in the interview about school choice.
We need competition because we know, since I went to public schools in 1970, and thank goodness my mother sacrificed and put me in a Catholic school, but I think about how it was failing children back then. That's 50 years ago. Right now, it's all pie in the sky. What can we do? How can we change the system it's a teacher's jobs program. That's what CPS is. That's what CTU is all about. So as I had a kid that was in first grade, I'm not going to rely on the fact that I'm going to vote for the right person that's going to enforce this and I'm going to make a change. No, if I were mayor, it would be vouchers, it would be a school choice, so people can have a choice. And then maybe the teachers union would say, well, gosh, we've got some competition. We got to get our act together.
Well, there you see, Stephanie Trussell is a solid conservative who happens to be black. And, that will be a help with many people, maybe into the black community. But I don't think she's not a racialist at all. She's not running on being black. It doesn't define her. What defines her are her views, as you can see if you watch that show throughout. And you watch that clip, school choice. It's not something she came into lately. 50 years ago, her mom, who she thanked there for putting her in a Catholic school where she obviously got a good education, and she's a bright, thoughtful woman, okay? And, she's not into all of this silliness we have now where people are talking about, systemic racism and everything else like that. No, she's talking there about school choice. She's talking about the terrible plight that we're still 50 years later. We have kids, minorities, largely black and Hispanic at CPS, reading at black kids in 11th grade, We saw wire points data showing black kids at CPS in 11th grade reading 14% reading at grade level. Hispanics in 11th grade, 25% reading at grade level. This is 50 years after Stephanie's mom took her out of CPS and put her in a Catholic school because she thought, and she was right, she'd get a much better education there. And so we have that problem. She'll be talking about that, I'm sure, statewide as she runs as the lieutenant governor candidate of Darren Bailey. She'll be talking, I'm sure, about fiscal conservatism and fiscal sanity. And I think she'll be talking about, the silliness of
well, I interviewed, I don't have a clip here, but I interviewed them, both Darren Bailey and Stephanie Trussell, when they were in Springfield a week ago today, right after the announcement. And they were making the argument that so many people are fed up with what's been going on in education that more and more people are going to want to have school choice now that the parents are seeing this critical race theory being taught, now that the Illinois legislature passed sex education, mandating sex education for kids as young as kindergarten kids and grade school. And by the way, Jeff, in an earlier show, when I put in the bite of Tony McCombie, Representative Tony McCombie, on the House floor when the bill was being debated, YouTube told me that they couldn't put advertising on that because it was too sexually charged, and yet McCombie was just reading from the bill. So it's really something of what has been happening here, and we see what happened in Virginia, where again it was education and the revulsion of some of the parents about what was going on in the schools in Loudoun County that led to a Republican being elected there. So it's interesting to see how this will play in Illinois as we go further into the gubernatorial election.
Well, yeah, and you haven't mentioned the 800-pound gorilla in the room, which is COVID, which is still with us. And we've had a year or two of closed schools. Closed why? Because the teachers said it wasn't safe. There's talking about closing them again as we return, as there's been a vacation, I assume Christmas vacation. Kids are supposed to be returning in January. Now a number of schools are saying maybe they should be returning to remote education because they're afraid of the number of cases, the surge with Omicron. Well, as I know, I saw Tucker Carlson say this. I think it must be the case. If it's the case, because Tucker Carlson reported nationally, but he said just a few days ago that there's been only one reported only one reported death of Omicron, and that it occurred in England, not in the U.S. And is that true? And we're doing all of this craziness now, and we're closing down schools. One reported death for this variant. I mean, there is a surge of increase in deaths and in Illinois. And also a surge in the percentage, relatively high percentage of deaths in breakthrough cases. So we may have something like a third of the deaths in Illinois in the last few weeks from COVID, of the total deaths that have occurred in the last few weeks, are coming from people who've been vaccinated as opposed to unvaccinated. And unvaccinated may explain more, but isn't that a high percentage coming from people who are now mandated to take a vaccine, and people are still dying in relatively large numbers who took that vaccine? I mean, these are the things that should be discussed. We're supposed to have a thoughtful society. We're supposed to have CDC that provides us truthful information. We're supposed to make decisions in a democracy. We're supposed to have the General Assembly of Illinois make these decisions now. They're no longer meeting remotely. They can meet in person. Why the hell is Governor Pritzker still issuing emergency executive orders? And why the hell are four Republican candidates for governor not talking more about it? And if Mayor Irvin is in the race, we want to know what his view is on that. Or should we do this usual stuff? Oh, did Irvin vote in a Democratic primary? They're talking about that. Did he do that more
Who's
than
talking about that?
Primary? Well, the people, now that the mainstream media have caught up with us, and now that Channel 5 and Channel 9 in Chicago, WGN, NBC have now said, okay, Griffin is in, and he's likely to be supporting Richard Irvin.
Well, hang on. I mean, I don't want to go on and on about some minor point, you know.
No, but they're reporting on this stuff now about the primary voting of Richard Irvin.
Let's go back and talk, speaking of this election.
Somebody should put a mic in Richard Irvin's face from NBC and say, what do you think about closing down schools? That's way more important than how he voted in a primary.
That's exactly right. That's way more important. That's why I didn't want to spend time. Who cares if he voted in a primary for a Democrat once before? It's immaterial. There's any number of people in Congress now who are Republicans that used to be Democrats. They switched parties somewhere along the line.
Yeah, what does he think about crime? Does he think about...
I mean, Ronald Reagan was a Democrat before he became a Republican. Who cares?
What would Irvin say? What would Irvin say about Kim Foxx? We've just had her. We'll take it right now.
We'll get to that, and that's why I wanted to say. One thing I was going to say is,
these are the issues of the
here's
day,
the thing that most hang on, we're missing a big story. I'm trying to bring this up. Slow down.
Pensions reform.
Hang on, Jeff. What we need to insert, is that a lot of people think, one, that Pritzker is unbeatable because he has so much money. But if Ken Griffin is willing to throw in $300 million, Pritzker could still outspend that, but that at least makes Republicans competitive to some extent as far as getting their name out and their message out. Now, as we saw with Hillary Clinton, if people have already decided against a candidate, and by 4 years ago people didn't know who Pritzker was, now they're going to have an opinion about it, what kind of a governor he is. For those who don't like the job that Governor Pritzker has done, I don't know that it makes a lot of difference if he's filling the airwaves with his commercials. What is going to matter, I think, if Griffin is putting money behind whoever the Republican candidate is, at least now we have a little bit more of an equal playing field for the Republicans to get their message out in a one-on-one after the June primary is decided. And that's the other thing. When is the money from Ken Griffin going to come into the race? I don't know if he's putting it, wait until the primary, or if he's putting in before.
We should say that officially he or his spokespeople have denied what you have just said. That is, they have said Ken Griffin has not decided on his candidate yet. He has spoken out about the importance of the crime issue in Chicago and how that spills over and is a statewide issue. He's spoken out about other issues as well, but he hasn't, they have said, decided yet who his candidate will be. Now, maybe he doesn't want to say, and he has decided, but we should report that as the official position, I believe, of Ken Griffin at this point. There is speculation in the last few weeks that Griffin has said, speculation, because he's not confirmed it, that Griffin has said he wants to see some other people put some money behind whoever the candidate will be, whether it's Irvin and so forth. And if they do that, the speculation was he would more than match that. But we don't know that yet. Maybe Griffin's going to let Irvin come in and compete with Sullivan and the other three candidates, and then we'll see. He may like the idea of competition and see if Irvin does. Well, maybe he'll at that point support him in the primary.
We've got about 10 minutes left, actually a little less than that, so I want to move along. Speaking of crime, and crime is going to be a big issue, one of the big stories that just happened was the conviction of Jussie Smollett. And today, Crain's, Chicago, came out with this article. This is a pullout from that article, that among crucial revelations is that Kim Foxx, the prosecuting attorney of Cook County, was in regular touch via phone calls and texts with Journey Smollett, Jussie Smollett's sister, for at least 5 days after Foxx knew that Chicago Police Department had opened an investigation into the actor for making a false report. Another revelation is that Foxx and aides falsely said Smollett could only be fined $10,000, the amount of bond money he had put forward and agreed to forfeit as part of the original charges. In fact, Smollett ultimately may be responsible for repaying the entire $300,000 the Chicago Police Department says it spent investigating his charges that he was attacked while walking near his hotel at 2 a.m. So we're going to see how that plays out. But again, this is part of the whole thing about the amount of crime going on in Chicago, the amount of murders, the theft, the carjacking, and we have a prosecuting attorney who now, as this report came out, said that she was maybe having connections that she shouldn't have had, that she's not been as transparent as she should have been, and that she was making her and her staff false statements. So that just came out with the release of this report today.
Well, yes, and to have a full airing on that, we're starting to have an airing because Dan Webb was appointed a special prosecutor, and that's what brought this prosecution up and the conviction, recent conviction of Jussie Smollett. But without Webb, it wouldn't have happened. Without Sheila O'Brien, Judge O'Brien, bringing it to the attention of Judge Tooman, it wouldn't have happened. Because let's face it, this is a Democratic state, a Democratic city of Chicago, Democratic Cook County, and it ain't happening unless there's a strong opposing force. Look, competition, you don't need the 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 farmers that you may have been taught in Econ 101, but you need at least 2 for competition. Really, there are some at Chicago, the University of Chicago say 3 or 4 are enough, but we haven't had 2. We've only
well, as a reminder, didn't we have Kim Foxx drop the charges against Smollett, even though it was pretty clear to a lot of people that this alleged attack didn't happen? And then how is it that, as she said, or she dropped the charges, run us back through, how is it that it came to be where Dan Webb then prosecuted him?
And Dan Webb did a report, which was just released today. That's what you were reading from. And Dan Webb, as a prosecutor, then was allowed by Judge Tooman to go ahead and prosecute this case against, which was dropped by.
Are there going to be any ramifications for Kim Foxx?
Well, there could be. Webb has said there's no criminal liability, but I think he's hinted, perhaps in this report, that perhaps bar associations may want to take a look to see if she's violated her duties as a lawyer. And you know, there's the bar association or the Attorney Registration Disciplinary Commission are charged with reviewing lawyers and their actions, and if they've not abided by the code of ethics, abided by the law, abided by their obligations as a lawyer, well, then they can be disciplined. And maybe she could be disciplined and therefore lose her job as state's attorney as a result of that. I don't know. It's speculation. I haven't looked at the law there. But I do know this. There's a lot of evidence that State's Attorney Foxx has abused, some would say, her discretion and not prosecuting many cases. And she said she's concentrating on violence, and others have said, no, you're not concentrating at all on that. And so people are not being prosecuted. I do know this. I do know that Sheriff Tom Dart was interviewed by Paul Lisnick, and he put a lot of the blame on carjackings, if not the entire thing, on auto manufacturers not making available data that they have that would allow tracking of the cars. He didn't mention at all the lack of prosecution by Kim Foxx, and Paul Lisnick didn't ask him that. We don't have competition. That's what we need here. You know, these are statewide issues now. The crime in Chicago and Cook County and lack of prosecution has become a statewide issue. You know, Jussie Sullivan, for one, made it a statewide issue.
I would argue it's a national issue, and it'll probably be played out across the country. But let's keep moving along here. Speaking of national issues, one of the big stories this week that has happened is President Biden's Build Back Better plan just went down in flames because Democrat Senator Joe Manchin, and as everyone knows who follows politics, the U.S. Senate is balanced 50 Republicans, 50 Democrats. It's only because of the vote of the vice president on a tie vote that the Democrats are controlling the chamber. But if you lose one Democratic senator, you lost the game on the Democratic side, and that's what happened to President Biden. We have a statement from November 1 of Joe Manchin when he said, "What I see are shell games and budget gimmicks that make the real cost of this so-called $1.75 trillion bill estimated to be twice as high if the programs are extended or made permanent. And so there were gimmicks being played that the Democrats are saying all these good things we're doing are going to end after a year or after 2 years. And Manchin, I think correctly, is saying that's a bunch of hooey. You're not going to be ending these programs. And if you're going to continue them out, as he was sure they would, and most observers would agree, I think, with that, that you're going to have, over a period of 10 years, the cost would be far more in the area of $5 trillion. And Jeff, one of the other big parts of news that this is very applicable to is the cost of inflation that we see happening right now. Here's CNBC, the Producer Price Index. Wholesale prices rose 9.6% in November from a year ago, the fastest pace on record, and that is a precursor to inflation at the kitchen table, which when the prices go up for producers, they pass those along. And we see that happening now, as we see here from our friends at WirePoints putting together inflation, now a real kitchen table issue. As we can see, the price of gasoline up 58%.
Items, there are 6.8%, but there are outliers that are much higher. And so when the Biden team came out and said, and they're pseudo-economists, half the folks don't even have an effing degree. Really, when you look it up, they're like a music major. And they said, oh, this was just a temporary thing. Isn't that what they said just 5 or 6 months ago? Mm-hmm. Now, okay, now inflation's a real thing. It's the same thing with crime. You know, you watch Washington Week in Review, they don't talk about crime. They don't talk about inflation. They talk about January 6th, okay, and how terrible it is, and that's all. Okay. WirePoint saying in that slide, inflation is near a 40-year high. They're only showing 10 years of that. That's all that's necessary. You can see the last 10 years, inflation is very low. You don't have to follow all the data and all the lines. You can see roughly it's running in that, hovering around that 2% level until this year, 6.8%. We won't go into all the craziness at the Federal Reserve. What does Biden have to do with it? These large deficits, $1 trillion that he's pumping into the system. Basically, they're monetizing that debt and those deficits, and it's the tremendous surge.
Well, in the money inflation is I mean, to be spending this trillions of dollars at this point, and kudos to Joe Manchin for pointing this out and standing firm to be putting this much money back into government spending when we are already seeing record inflation. That is like throwing gasoline on a fire. It would be, and once you get that out, we would have to go back to, for the younger viewers, Jeff, you remember, but back in 79 and 80 and 81, we had interest rates on homes going up to 15, 16%. We had CDs that were paying 18%. We don't want to go back to those days because it took a lot of pain to bring that inflation down with those extremely high interest rates and the cost of business, and it cost jobs. We had a lot of people losing their jobs because of a slow economy.
Those high interest rates cause nominal interest rates to be very high, not real interest rates, but nominal interest rates, because you have to have an inflation premium if you're going to borrow or lend money.
All right, that's the last word.
We don't want to go back to that. You're right. And so this is all coming to the fore nationally. Do we really want to be spending $2 trillion more? The answer is no. We don't want inflation. We don't. All
right, we got to wrap. We're heavy. Folks, give us a comment if you. What are you thinking about? What are the big issues that you are concerned about on the gubernatorial race? Is it the economy? Is it COVID? Or is it what's going on in our schools? Just leave us a comment. Have a great Christmas season. Happy Hanukkah. And Jeff, hope you have a
reminder that if they're watching on YouTube, like us, comment. We'll comment back and forth, comment on the show. Yes, a belated Happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, and a Happy New Year. It all should be joy for all of our good friends who watch us here on the Illinois Channel and Public Affairs.